Welcome back to the State and Local Sports Show here with Mark Tennis, the co-founder and editor of CalHighSports.com. We're sitting here in the record office at about 4:35 on Tuesday. We're about half hour away from the World Series between the Chicago Cubs and Cleveland Indians. Both of those teams a couple thousand miles away, but as always, it seems like with any major sporting events, some California high school ties. I know you did some research on the World Series. No local guys per se, at least from area high schools, but what did you find in your research?
Well, I mean, before the game even got set up, we knew that we were going to have two players from the same high school that are going to be in the World Series. In fact, they were high school teammates. That's Mike Montgomery of the Cubs and Trevor Bauer of the Indians, the two pitchers. They're both from Hart High School in Newhall, and they were on the same team. And now they're on separate teams in the World Series. And they were also on the same high school team with Trevor Brown, the catcher of the Giants, plus three other guys from Hart High School who are in the major leagues this season, which is just incredible. In general, however, California really doesn't do that well this time in the World Series. There's only 6 players from the state that went to high school in California. They're in the World Series. And this is the first time in about 7 or 8 years that California is not first. In fact, California is behind Texas and Florida this time, and Florida has really got some hot players this time. And one of them is Addison Russell, the former Stockton Port. Florida counted 13 players from Florida high schools in the World Series, and I believe that's probably an all-time high, an all-time record. So a great year for Florida in the World Series. Not so good for California, but we do have the two players from Hart. And another one that's really interesting, and I know, Thomas, you remember them from covering those schools way up there, but we have a pitcher from the Cleveland Indians who's in the World Series, Cody Anderson, who's from tiny little Quincy, California. And Quincy's only has about 150 kids. It's way up there in the middle of nowhere. And Cody Anderson a year ago was the Grand Marshal of the Quincy High Homecoming Parade. And this year, a year later, he's in the World Series. So I think that's just a great story.
You know, there's a handful of guys from area high schools who are in the major leagues. The one I think we could see in the World Series in the nearest future, just because of where his team is at, is St. Mary's Ty Kelly is on the Mets. I mean, they're in the World Series last year. He got called up, got some time this year. I believe he had a hit in the wild card game.
He got a hit off Bumgarner.
It seems like the only person who got a hit off Bumgarner in that wild card game, although I know it's not technically true. I mean, you could see him there if their pitching is incredible, so he might have his name up in lights there pretty soon. Looking back to high school football, we're going into week 9 of the regular season, and part of my prep notebook, which I do every week, I took a look at active coaching wins leaders, of course, with the help of Cal High Sports database that they have, their state record books. And the obvious number one, of course, is Mark Luero, who's at 274. He's not just our active wins leader or any wins leader. He's the all-time section wins leader for the time being. And after that, we got Linden's Mark Miller at 163. He was there from 1976 through 1997, took a long break, came back in 2010. St. Mary's Tony Franks, who will almost certainly, in my mind, surpass Miller this fall, is at 160. 141 of those have come from 2002 to the present. He also had 3 seasons in the mid-'80s in which he racked up 19 wins, as Mark kindly told me earlier today. Eric Reese at Manteca at 133, and then Rick Davis, who just returned to Argonaut after a couple years off, is at 108. Who's the all-time leader for the state? I don't think it's going to be a shock. The school. And do you think there's a chance that Laredo could get caught anytime soon?
Well, the all-time leader for California is Bob Ladouceur from De La Salle, 399. It's just great that he retired at a number like that, 399. It fits him to a T. And I don't think there's anybody within about 50 or 60 of him, and it's probably going to hold up unless Bob Johnson of Mission Viejo coaches for 5 or 6 more years until he's in his 70s. I don't think that's likely, but you never know because Mission Viejo is really piling up the wins. He's at, I think, 339 or 340. But Ladouceur is first at 399, and when will Laredo be caught? That's a tough question. I mean, Mike Alberghini at Grant is behind.
Not by much. He's in the 260s.
Yeah,
somewhere.
He's not by much, but he's it's just a matter of which one of these guys might retire first. Is really what it boils down to. Grant, last year they won 10 games. They won 14 the year before that. This year's team looked like they might be really good early on, but now they just lost to Sheldon. So, they're battling in their league, in the Delta League. So I'm not sure. So, I mean, it remains to be seen. They've got some good young players. I know a lot of people at Grant are fired up about some freshmen and sophomores coming up. So if Coach A hangs around for all those guys to go through the system, and Coach Luero hangs it up in a year or two, then that might, and Alberghini may be able to pass him.
Couple of enormous games this week in high school football. We have Lincoln at Tracy. Of course, Mark, former sports editor of the Tracy Press.
Oh, yes, proud of it.
Lincoln is guaranteed a section playoff spot with a win over Tracy because they would clinch at least the number 2 spot in the Tri-State Athletic League. Tracy is just most likely. If they win, they need to beat West the next week to be guaranteed. West is winless this season. Tracy would be a heavy favorite there. In terms of picking this game, brutal. I know Cal Preps has Lincoln 38, Tracy 35. That's probably pretty astute, at least in the ballpark. Lincoln can just score in bunches. Tracy can show that it can run the ball against TCAL teams, and that helps them milk the clock. As you mentioned before we were talking here, their schedule actually turned out to be pretty difficult. I like Lincoln just because I think they're going to outscore them by just enough. But, I mean, this game is really such a coin flip to me, and having not seen either this year, I'm kind of just looking forward to seeing what happens.
Yeah, I haven't seen either team as well. I did see Lincoln actually against Antioch, and I liked the way they kind of hung in there and battled and had some moments where it looked like they might get back in the game. And you mentioned Tracy. I mean, they played Freedom in San Ramon Valley, which at the time looked like, oh boy, Tracy's not very good because Freedom just rocked them. And then San Ramon Valley, they lost to them, and that wasn't really that much of a margin. And now Freedom is rolling along at number 14 in the state, and San Ramon Valley was only lost to De La Salle by 1 point. So Tracy's schedule does look a lot better. I do think Lincoln is probably favored, but it could be a very interesting game, and probably will be high scoring.
In the Valley Oak League, I'd say probably the top medium-sized school league in the section. We have Oakdale at Manteca. It's called the Milk Jug Rivalry, or at least it used to be called that, a reference to the copious amounts of dairy farmers in both towns. It is the 96th edition of the Milk Jug Rivalry. That's another Cal High historical fact. Oakdale leads the series 51-40-4 all time. This is a series that started in the 1920s. I think both teams are just really powerful in the trenches, but Manteca, I believe, will have better skill position guys, and that'll give Oakdale problems. I mean, I think Manteca maybe by a field goal or so. What's your take on this game?
I would probably, Manteca being at home, I would probably make them a slight favorite. That seems to make a difference in the series. Another note on the series, I believe they're consecutive years back to the early 1920s, and they never missed one. And that's even Oakdale and Sonora have missed a couple years in between in those years, and that's a storied rivalry as well. The thing I'm impressed about Oakdale this year is I really like the way they bounced back from their loss to Sonora, and they beat Camp Alindo, a quality team that's been to state bowl games, been 16-0, and I like the way Oakdale beat them, and they played pretty well, played kind of Oakdale football the last few weeks, and this gives me, I think Manteca's favored, but it does give pause because Oakdale's been playing very well lately, and you know how much they want to set up a big showdown game with Central Catholic.
All right, over on CalHighSports.com, the Gold Club membership is less than $20 a year, less than $2 a month. It's not just those record books we've been talking about, but features, stories, insider content, and now part of that subscription, you get Sac Joaquin's section, top 25 rankings too, one of my favorite parts of the site. Mark, thanks for joining us as always, man. We appreciate it.
No problem. My pleasure. Thank you.